Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel. I am QB, and this channel will be used to talk about anything sports related, though mainly concerning the four major North American sports: the NHL, the NFL, the MLB, and the NBA. Now, this is for a school project, so once that project is over, I will likely not really be uploading on this channel. If I do upload, it would be very infrequently, so just keep that in mind if you like my videos. And with that out of the way, let's get into the topic of today's podcast. So today I will be discussing COVID-19 and its effects on sports. So first of all, what is COVID-19? So, according to the World Health Organization, COVID-19 is an infectious disease caused by a newly discovered coronavirus. Most people infected with the COVID-19 virus will experience mild to moderate respiratory illness. Older people and those with underlying medical problems are more likely to develop serious illness. COVID-19 spreads primarily through droplets of saliva or discharge from the nose when an infected person coughs or sneezes. So it's important that you practice respiratory etiquette, like covering your nose when you cough or sneeze, that you physical distance, and that you wash your hands and use hand sanitizer very frequently. Now, with that part out of the way, let's get into the more sports-related part. First of all, I will break down how it has affected sports into three parts. So the revenue generated will be the first part. Then the second part is how it has affected the seasons. And then the third will be how it has affected the players. So first of all, for the revenue, we're starting off worldwide. So all the sports in the world. According to Statista.com, the worldwide projected sports revenue in 2020, pre-COVID, was $135.3 billion US dollars. As of April 20th, 2020, the world projected sports revenue was $73.7 billion US dollars, about half of the original projection. That number has likely changed, as that projection was made before the NFL announced that some teams would have some fans, but it was also made, I'm going to assume, on the assumption that the NHL and NBA would have full seasons instead of the short ones that they are having, and that the MLB would have longer than just a 60-game schedule compared to their usual 162 game. So while that $73.7 billion US dollars is almost certainly inaccurate at this moment, it is probably still relatively close to the current projection. So moving on to the first of the four major sports, the NBA. Now this is on the 1920 season, so the past season that got cut because of COVID, and then they resumed in the bubble in Orlando. So in the 1920 season, the estimated gate revenue, which is tickets lost, was $450 million US dollars. The estimated non-ticket revenue lost, so like concession stand purchases, merchandise purchases, and parking, was $200 million US dollars. While that may not seem like a lot, keep in mind that that was over the 1920 season. So, and when the season was cut short, each team only had about 15 to 20 games left before the playoffs. So that revenue lost is only over about maybe a quarter of the season plus the playoffs. Well over half of the games had already been played, probably closer to about 2/3. And that doesn't include the revenue that they will lose for the 2021 season without any or with barely any fans at the games. The NBA will have been hit hard. Now, moving on to the NHL, and the NHL is a bit interesting compared to the other three sports. So, the NHL makes an estimated 75% of their revenue generated from ticket sales and game day sales of merchandise and concession. That's according to Forbes. And all of that is lost due to COVID-19. The NHL only generates about $530 million US dollars on national television per season. That is lacking compared to the NFL at about $7 billion, the NBA at about $2.67 billion, and the MLB at roughly $1.55 billion per season. So the NHL needs to make up a lot of that lost money with ticket sales and merchandise or slash concession sales, and all of that is lost due to COVID-19. So from that, I would I would guess that the NHL was probably hit hardest in terms of the percentage of revenue that they lost from COVID-19. And now we will move on to the MLB. So this is an interesting one. It's the only league that has played a full season in 2020. Their season was really shortened, but they still have completed a season. In their 60-game schedule in 2020, teams lost more than $5 million US dollars in game day revenue. The New York Yankees alone lost an estimated 437 million US dollars, which is just an incredible amount. That is according to the Pittsburgh Business Times. And now moving on to the NFL, whose season is still currently going on. So this is the total team revenue generated in 2019 by the NFL was 5.5 billion, at least 5.5 billion. A lot of that is lost, even though some teams are allowing fans in the building. A prime example of that is the Dallas Cowboys. They made a league-leading revenue of 950 million US dollars in 2019, and ticket sales made up 621 million of that. The Cowboys will have lost a lot of revenue, and they're trying to make up some of that lost revenue by allowing a max capacity of 31,700 fans into their stadium with an average attendance of 26,466 fans. That is by far the most fans, although it's a far cry from their average attendance of 90,000 in the 2019 season. And now the NFL also makes a lot of money off of television. Their shared revenue was an estimated 9.5 billion in 2019, which that can still be gained or even increase, as the NFL for sure has the most fans in North America, and more people who go to almost all of their team's games will be watching from home this year with the lack of fans at the stadium. So that is the first segment in this podcast on the revenue, and I will now be moving on to how the COVID-19 has affected the seasons of those leagues. So first, the NFL has really no change this season. It's still a 17-week season, each team playing 16 games, and getting one bye week. However, some of the games have had to be really rearranged due to COVID-19. For example, the Tennessee Titans early in the season screwed up some schedules. Teams like my favorite team, the Buffalo Bills, lost their bye week or had their bye week changed. And now recently the Baltimore Ravens have been screwing up some schedules. They played the Steelers on Wednesday, and that knocked Thursday Night Football off of the table for the next week. And the Denver Broncos had to play a game with no quarterback. Well, they put like a wide receiver at quarterback who had played in college, but due to COVID-19, so that was interesting. But yeah, overall, the NFL's schedule hasn't really changed. Just some games have been moved around, and some teams have been kind of screwed, like Denver. And now the NHL, their 1920 season was cut short. Each team played around like 70 games, and then they moved into the bubble, obviously, which had the 2014 playoff and ended with the Tampa Bay Lightning hoisting the Stanley Cup. And their 2021 season, which will only be played in 2021, is only going to be 56 games. Their divisions have been changed. There's the All-Canadian division, which might not even play in Canada, so who knows what's going on. I really hope that there still is the All-Canadian division and that it stays in Canada. Now, the MLB, their 2020 season was only 60 games compared to the usual 162. That's just over a third of their regular amount of games. Other than that, they basically had a normal season. They still had their normal 3-4 game series. They still had their full travel, which the NFL has as well. Although early on, the MLB got a lot of COVID cases, and there are a lot of people doubting their schedule. I was one of them. I would say bubbles are certainly the best strategy. Although I don't think anyone is using a bubble this season for this upcoming season. And finally, we have the NBA. So they had the 1920 season cut short. They obviously ended in the bubble with the Los Angeles Lakers winning, and now their 2021 season has been reduced to 72 games. It starts December 22nd, so in 3 days of the time of recording this, and it will end, who knows when, late for sure later than normal, but I think their goal is not that much later. So that's a bit of how those four leagues have had their seasons changed, but with delays, cancellations, and shortening. And now the final subject in this about how COVID-19 has affected North American sports is players opting out. Now, starting with the MLB, for their 2020 60-game season, 22 players opted out. Quite a few of those guys were like random depth guys, but there were some huge names such as David Price, who I would hope you recognize, was a star for the Tampa Bay Rays, went to Detroit, was a star there, went to the Jays for half a season, was a star there. Loved that time. And then went to the Red Sox, was pretty solid, and then was traded to the Dodgers where he opted out. And now the next big name is Buster Posey of the San Francisco Giants. Posey has kind of fallen off recently, but in 2012 he was the NL MVP. He was really good in his prime. And finally, Marcus Stroman. According to their WAR, he wasn't the third biggest name, but I had to include him because I'm a Jays fan, and I feel like he's more notable than some of the other guys on that list. In total, 22 players opted out, like I said. Now moving on to the NFL. So for their 2020-21 season, they had 66 players opt out. Now, the NFL has huge rosters. I think it's like 53-man rosters. So the 66 players may seem huge, but it's really not that big when you look at the amount of players in that league. Some notable names are C.J. Mosley, a linebacker for the New York Jets, and Donta Hightower, another linebacker for the New England Patriots. And finally, you got the NBA and the NHL. Both of them were the 2020 restart. I couldn't find any info on players opting out for their upcoming seasons. But for the NBA 2020 restart, the huge name that opted out was Bradley Beal. He was a star for the Washington Wizards last season. He will be a star paired with Russell Westbrook this season. And I mean, the Wizards didn't really have much of a hope in the bubble, but the fact that their best player by far opted out is for just kind of made it certain that they had no hope. And now to the NHL, really no one big opted out. The only big name I could find was Travis Hamonic. It's kind of like just a second pair D-man, nothing special. He's still a UFA this year, likely due to COVID, but that's just the name that I could find. I wouldn't be surprised if you don't like hockey that you have no idea who he is. But, yeah. And with the Hamonic, that's another thing. There are still quite a few players who are free agents, especially in the NHL. For example, Mike Hoffman, who before COVID probably would have signed like 5 years, $6 million, which doesn't sound huge, but for the NHL, that is huge. And the aforementioned Hamonic, and some others like Anthony Duclair just signed for 1 year, $1.7 million, which is probably less than half of what he would have got before COVID. But yeah, that's kind of how COVID has affected the players with opt-out outs, and then for the NHL, some still great players being in free agency. So that will kind of do it for my first episode. I hope you enjoyed. And if you want to go give me a follow over on Instagram, my user is at QB Sports. The link will be in the description. I am also participating in a sim league on NHL 21 run by at Skate Sim League on Instagram. My team is the St. Louis Blues. I'm not a Blues fan, Leafs fan, but the Leafs, Blackhawks, Canucks, and Flames, my 4 favorite teams, were all taken, so I just chose the Blues at random, and I got them. So if you want to go look at that, give me a follow and keep up on my news. I will be posting all the trades and signings and other things that I make on the Instagram. That is at simleague_stl.blues. It will also be in the description. And with that, I think that'll do it. Thank you for listening. Have a good time, and let's hope that the COVID-19 pandemic is over soon. Bye.